Welcome, welcome, everybody. Thanks for downloading another episode of Wigs for Wigs. I'm Joe Cook, and I'm joined once again by our political panel, Bill Venezia, Judge Ed DeFazio, and Dr. Michael Buxbaum. It is the middle of summer here. We're recording this on July 10th, 2025, if you're catching up in the future on episodes. We just had the passage of the big, beautiful bill. I'm sure we'll discuss that a little bit. We talked about our expectations with that last week, but the doctor wasn't with us, and now it's actually been finalized. So that'll be a topic of discussion. And there's been some other stuff happening. There's the revelation that apparently there is not an Epstein list, even though it's on Pam Bondi's desk, if you listened to her a few months ago. What else has been going on? Donald Trump seemed surprised to find out an African leader could speak English yesterday, even though the native language of that country was English in Liberia. And there's been other stuff. So I'll go around to everybody, let them have their initial thoughts, what stood out to them recently. Doctor, you weren't with us last week, so I'll let you go first.
Well, what I find interesting when you said big, beautiful bill, that even Democrats call it by this rather inappropriate name. My name for it is the big ugly, largely because of the issue of raising the debt. I believe that the debt is one of the biggest problems for America, that they can really put us into a tremendous into not only in recession, but lose our reputation. This bill will increase the deficit by $3 trillion. And what's even more disturbing, if it wasn't kind of so tragic, is that the people who were talking about being fiscally responsible actually caved in. And so I'm just very concerned about it. So that's the negative. There have been some positives. I think the NATO summit was a positive in that, interestingly enough, Trump was congratulated by the new Secretary General, Mark Rutte, for actually making Europe spend more money. A lot of the Europeans have now committed to spending 5% of their GDP on defense, and they actually thanked Trump for forcing them or making them happen that money. The other positive is that basically the border is secure. Very few people are coming through the border. And thirdly, it's clear that Trump is using these threats of tariffs in a kind of way to try and get deals. And the markets came back. And in fact, within the last couple of weeks, there have been record highs on Wall Street. So I would say those things. And of course, not mentioning the issue with Iran, which was great, that Iran has been essentially emasculated and Israel has total air superiority. So that's my brief mention.
Let me just ask you, you brought up the NATO summit. You don't think they're publicly thanking Trump just because they know that saying anything nice to him is the way to get on his good side and let him feel good about you?
100%. I totally agree. Just like Netanyahu having nominated him for Nobel Prize. So this is all that, but nevertheless, they said it and they are doing it.
Okay. Well, I think there's a reason for it because of his reluctance to embrace Article 5 of NATO. So should, say, Poland be invaded by Russia, hypothetically, the United States would have to come to the aid because of Article 5 to Poland. And Trump has hedged on that. He hasn't committed to it, and I'm sure that makes the rest of Europe nervous because the way the Ukrainian war is going right now. And that's what I wanted to talk about. I mean, I agree with Michael. There is a bright spot. Okay, the borders are closed. Unfortunately, I think ICE is acting almost like stormtroopers, and there's no accountability there. There's no transparency there to see what they're doing. And it's like amplified by the fact that you have these guys wearing masks, which we talked about the last time. I'm very, very cautious and very wary of that. But getting back to the Ukraine, when the president says he was not aware that we stopped arms shipments, I mean, what's going on? Who's controlling the foreign policy? I have worries about Trump, like his impending senility, to be truthful with you, if that's the truth. I don't believe him for 1 minute. He's been negotiating with Putin on his own and leaving Ukraine out of it, and he's getting bitch slapped by Putin. And I think it's a face-saving thing. And I'll believe when they open the faucet to getting more aid at a very critical juncture, when most of the deaths in the Ukraine are civilians, they're getting pounded. And they really do need our help and Europe's help. And I don't see it forthcoming.
Well, yeah, in regard to the war in Ukraine, I think we can talk quite a bit about that in this episode after we get through these initial thoughts of everybody. But he also seemed unaware of these reports that Russia has been using chemical weapons in Ukraine. Like, again, to doubt them or be skeptical of them is one thing, but he seemed completely unaware that even these reports are out there when it came up in his cabinet meeting the other day. Hegseth didn't seem to know about it either and said, I think John can talk about it, which we assume is John Ratcliffe, the head of the CIA. And he just said, I can't share anything with anybody right now about that. I mean, that if you're going to televise these cabinet meetings, can somebody actually answer a question when it comes up? But sorry, we'll talk a lot about Ukraine today. Judge, your initial, what you're watching.
Well, in large part, I agree with Michael about the impact of the big, beautiful bill. I know we've been discussing this on prior occasions about the debt, the deficit and the debt. It's a big issue. Nobody really wants to wrap their head around it as to what we can do. To his credit, Rand Paul takes a tough stance on that. I saw him interviewed this morning, Rand Paul, on CNBC, and he was telling an interesting story about how he was in negotiations with the Senate leadership and Vice President Vance. And according to him, it came down to whether they would adopt the position of Rand Paul, which was they'd have to come to an agreement about the debt, or in the alternative, deal with Lisa Murkowski and give her that special treatment for Alaska, for the whale captains and the like. And if we take a step back and we look at that and we see that they decided to side with the whale captains as opposed to the debt crisis, that is a very disturbing commentary on what is going on. And let me just say this as an aside, the Democrats are no better. Okay? No better. They want to keep talking about the problems, and they are, and I'm not minimizing this, about the cuts to Medicaid. All right, I agree. There seems to be a lot of unfairness here, but nobody on the Democratic side is talking about the debt crisis, and I'm calling it a crisis. So I'm getting very frustrated with the Democrats. I saw the chairman, the Democratic National Chairman, interviewed last night on the PBS NewsHour, and I will tell you this, I was singularly unimpressed by this guy. So I don't know. We have to, of course, we have to try to remain optimistic. But some of these important issues have to be framed in the correct way and brought to the forefront. So that's my commentary.
Well, everything's being dictated from the Project 225. And if you look that once our boy from Tesla, Elon Musk, left, the person who's basically running Doge is Vought, who is one of the authors of 225. And unless the Republicans and the Democrats, do something bipartisan wise, like was attempted for the border bill, nothing's going to happen. And Trump is not the conduit to have something like that ever happen. Honestly, it's just as an aside from the big beautiful bill, the and how it coincides with immigration. The Kristi Noem and Trump on their 4th of July in Iowa basically spoke to reporters telling them that they were willing to let farmers vouch for migrant workers so that they could remain here. And then 4 days later, Vought, who was not Vought, the Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, said that all foreign workers are going to be deported and that there's no reason to believe that the people who were 34 million people of Medicare workers to receive their Medicare, they should become farm workers. And just an aside to that, in 99, Clinton had a similar plan to use the unemployed, to basically in his welfare reform bill. And there was a person, Manuel Cunha, who was in charge of the farm workers, the International Farm Workers League. He decided to basically interview them to get them jobs to become farm workers. 3 people showed up. Now, I don't know where this guy, Secretary Rollins, thinks that he's going to get American workers to do farm work. And we're talking about a $543 billion a year industry. 59 billion of that is just in California alone. So the clock's ticking on the fall harvest. And that's going to be very, very interesting to see how that impacts the economy, not only of California, but all the farm states.
You see, I think
just to clarify real quick, Doctor, and then you can talk.
Well, I just want to reply to that because I just don't see how it will be possible to deport 10 to 20 million people. I mean, to deport few hundred causes huge amount of blowback. The Abrego Garcia case kind of took up, for one person, took up huge amount of news, and there is a lot of pushback against it. So, and Trump himself started saying that the people who are gainfully employed and who are not involved in any criminal activities can stay because a lot of them work in hotel industry, which is part of his, and people are protesting it. So the tragedy of it, I find, is that the reasonable people on both sides cannot make a compromise, which should be, in my opinion, relatively easy. You could say all the people who have committed crimes should be deported, but the people who are here, who are productive, who are needed for farm work, construction, should stay. And then we can decide about what to do with these people who kind of haven't really been found guilty of crimes, but are loitering the streets or are staying around Home Depots and so on. But it will be impossible to deport millions of people just looking at what's happening now. There'd be just too much. We are a democracy, and there are a lot of people who will be protesting it, and just the expense of it will be unsustainable. So I am not concerned about that so much. But what I'm concerned about is that you cannot have reasonable people on both sides of the aisle reach a compromise on that immigration situation.
Well, I mean, I think part of the problem is the hardliners especially are refusing to compromise, and they're portraying anybody who came here in an undocumented way as if they're members of these Venezuelan gangs and things. Even Abrego Garcia, who you brought up, if you listen to what they were all saying about him and why he was such a horrible person who needed to be shipped out of the country, it sounded like he was ultra terrorist drug cartel man number one. And yet what they're actually planning to charge him with is driving some undocumented workers from one place to another. That's not exactly, Hispanic Osama bin Laden, which is what they made him sound like when they talked about him.
But that's the point I was trying to make. That just to try and deport one person causes so much problem. So how are you going to deport, 10 million people? That's not going to happen.
Well,
I just wanted to correct real quickly. I didn't get a chance. The Secretary of Agriculture is a woman. A couple times you referred to her as he. Bill Brooke Rollins is
I'm sorry.
a female.
I didn't know the gender.
Yeah.
I apologize to Secretary Rollins.
Yeah, I don't know where we're gonna go with this whole. I mean, we talked about it last week. My biggest problem, honestly, is one, they're treating anybody who's undocumented as if they are the same, as if they're all committed very serious crimes, which I'm not disputing that coming here illegally or undocumented is a crime. It is, but many of them do contribute to our economy, and to kick them all out is one, impractical, as you said, doctor, but also it's just immoral, really, also. And there's also the fact that I have to keep on bringing it up. I do every time we talk about immigration, because he never seems to learn. Donald Trump still seems to honestly think that somebody here seeking asylum means they came from an insane asylum. He doesn't seem to understand that that's not the same thing. How do you make a deal with somebody who just doesn't understand basic terminology about people who move across international borders?
He should.
It's difficult. It's difficult to talk about this issue with clarity because there's no transparency from the federal government about what is going on. We, for instance, I'll just throw this out here. It came into my mind. There was this proposal put on the table about people self-deporting, that they would actually be paid, I think it was $1,000, and they would be given their airfare to go home. Now, we haven't seen one bit of reporting about how many people, if any, took advantage, using that word loosely, of that proposal. And that's just a small example of what I'm talking about. There is no transparency. You have different people in authority in this administration talking at cross purposes at the same time. And we really don't know. We don't know how many people have been deported. There hasn't been a good number on accurate number, I don't think, on that. And this brings me to another point where I'm frustrated. The media, and when I say the media, I mean whatever outlet. They are suffering from attention deficit disorder because there is no follow-up on important issues. So, I think that obviously, and we all agree, we want to see criminals removed, and we want to see people with warrants removed, and we want to see people who are wanted in their home country for a crime removed, I would think. And of course, from there, it gets a lot more difficult as to how we respond to illegal immigration.
See, this to me, the right basically has simple solutions to complex problems. And
right. Correct.
This takes hard work to develop comprehensive policy that is done in a bipartisan nature. And this administration has no regard for the bipartisanship of the job or the hard work of the job. It's easy to say, to spout, the immigration policy, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. But truthfully, there's no way to judge the efficacy of it. Number one, there's no transparency to see exactly judge who's going. I mean, to me, I worry that basically they're taking DACA kids and they're basically deporting them. And I was somewhat heartened to see, although I think there's a political motive for it. Alligator Alley, Alligator Alcatraz in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
The governor of Florida is basically telling the federal government, we haven't seen a dime for this. You expect us to pay for this? I mean, it's all, it's mirrors. I mean, it's all basically for show. It's red meat to the base. And I think the base, once they get hit with the loss of Medicare, with the loss of rural hospitals, in the past, I think it was calculated that people who are poor do not show up to vote. And I'm wondering, in the coming elections, will they show up to vote when they get hurt with the lack of health care, with the underfunding of Medicare? It's going to be, it's not Medicare, Medicaid. It's going to be interesting to see how that shows up. And I think the two bellwethers of the policies are going to be in New Jersey and Virginia with the gubernatorial elections in November. I just saw that Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey has just raised from Democratic donors $20 million. So I think she's going to have a really good war chest. And I don't think that Jack Citarella is going to basically get the same kind of financial backing from the Republican Party, especially from Trump.
Well, I think we'll do an episode soon focusing on New Jersey issues, since we're all here. But the doctor's a Pennsylvanian, but it is all performative, used for show. I mean, they have the videos that they put together of forcing people onto planes, and they have the people in masks. It's all just performative. The numbers, I don't think, are huge of who's actually getting deported right now. It's to put on a show. And you brought up the fact about them expecting Florida to pay to build this prison. Well, they expect the states apparently to pay for a lot of things. If we want to talk about the floods in Texas and other natural disasters, what is Kristi Noem saying as they try to dismantle FEMA is this is what Kristi Noem the other day, we expect states to handle the burden of that and do everything they can and more. They expect states to do everything they can and more. How do you do more than you can? But
Governor Abbott was on the FEMA busting advisory board. He agreed with that. Now he's got hat in hand looking for federal aid, which Trump basically told him he'd get. I guess it only applies to a red state. Let's see what happens with New Jersey if we are to get hit with a hurricane like Sandy again.
So, before we switch the subject to these natural disasters, the last thing I want to say about this deportation, another thing which I find insane is that we are deporting these people to and paying for their stay. So either to El Salvador or Alcatraz. Why not just deport them to the country where they came from? So you are deporting somebody into a prison which the American taxpayer is paying for. So let's say those 240 or whatever the number was of the Venezuelans who went to El Salvador, why not just deposit them in Venezuela and not pay anything?
Not only that.
So all of that is crazy. So if you're going to be, we all agree, and I would say 90% of Americans agree, that the people with criminal histories should be deported. But why not deport them to a country where they came from and pay nothing rather than pay somebody else with American taxpayer money?
But it's not only that, it's also the immoral side of it, because it's not just, okay, let's take a Venezuelan and send them to El Salvador. The government has actually been going to court and arguing they should be allowed to send them to South Sudan.
Yeah, I heard of that.
Or Libya, or completely other parts of the world, and then just drop them there. I mean, I don't know what their legal status becomes at that point. They're almost not even people then, because you came undocumentedly from Venezuela to the United States, and then the United States dumped you in South Sudan. But I don't even understand the logic of that, other than to just be cruel.
Yeah, there's no logic to it at all.
No, that is cruel. But I will say this. I think part of the issue is with the Venezuelans being sent to El Salvador is that Venezuela won't take their own people back. And I know it's the policy of Cuba that they won't take people back. So you see, that's another wrinkle in the situation. And that's been a long-standing issue prior to the Trump administration. The native countries won't accept them.
Right, but then you can just deposit them there anyway. It doesn't matter if they don't want to accept.
What are we going to kick? What are you going to kick
Yeah,
them
but
out of
you
the plane
clear
without a
airfield.
parachute?
Hey, Eddie, do you remember Santos Traficante? RFK and the Justice Department deported him. They kidnapped him, and the next thing you knew, he was in Honduras.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, they deported Lucky Luciano. Swept him off the street, and basically, next thing he knew, he was in Palermo.
Yeah, I mean, the Venezuelan nation also, you clear an airfield with the U.S. Air Force or Army, and you deposit them in Venezuela. They are Venezuelan citizens, so who cares if Maduro accepts them or not? That's not relevant.
Yeah, are we not strong enough to make Venezuela do what we want? I
Right.
thought we were this big country.
Yeah.
I thought countries were going to respect us again and do what we wanted.
Just like Putin.
And I wanted to come to Putin.
I know next. You do. I know you want to get there, Joe.
Does it seem like Donald Trump might finally be getting an inkling that Vladimir Putin maybe isn't the greatest person in the world in his recent comments? He's only 30 years behind the rest of us in knowing who Vladimir Putin is, but I give him credit. He's a slower learner. Everybody learns at a different pace as an educator, I should say that. But he's getting there, that maybe we shouldn't take everything Vladimir Putin says at face value. Good for Trump. I'm so proud of him.
I mean, it's so naive to even believe that that's what's going on. I mean, I'm sorry. There's more to it than that, which we'll probably never know. But the truth of the matter is, if it pushes American foreign policy to help Ukraine, I mean, and truthfully, it's sad because like Gaza, Michael, right now, civilians are being killed, and it seems to be basically civilian targeted. I mean, there were 55 civilians killed in Gaza a few days ago. And there were terrorist attacks to follow it up, from Yemen.
I mean,
that's going to continue to happen.
I think that there is a lot of daylight on this issue of Israel. So maybe at one point we should have a whole podcast on that, because I see things very differently. But sadly, I mean, we are currently on Ukraine. There's no question that we need to support Ukraine. The only difference between supporting Ukraine and, let's say, the situation in Middle East is that Russia has nuclear weapons. So we need to be careful about it, because Putin, and I don't really understand why he's able to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of Russian lives without any protests in Russia. Maybe he's just more of a, maybe he's just so powerful, or his dictatorship is such that people are afraid. But I mean, several hundred thousand people of Russians have been killed. So the question is, and Biden suffered with that as well, and that's a tough one. I mean, if any of us was in that position, it would be tough, because if you start really hitting Russia very hard, the question is, are they going to use the nuke? Because Putin seems to be extremely determined to keep fighting, even though Trump offered him all kinds of, he gave him everything Putin wanted, essentially, up front before the negotiation, and Putin is still not willing to stop. So the question is, if we start hitting Putin really hard, which we could, is he going to use the nuke?
When you say hitting him hard, I'm not saying American intervention like we did with Iran. I'm saying more and more powerful sanctions to basically kneecap them. If you look why that there's not a big push against them in Russia, look at the people jumping out of buildings. Yeah, they're jumping out of buildings. I mean, he's got an ironclad fist when it comes to anybody who opposes them in Russia. And these people know it. I mean, if you looked at the immigration from Russia to other countries, a lot of basically Russians have left.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, those that remain, they're powerless to basically do anything again.
No, but let's say we paralyzed. One thing that
not.
Russia is they're still able to sell oil on the gray market, particularly to India and to China. Yeah. Now, if we use the U.S. Navy to try and stop them, the question is money wouldn't be flowing in anymore. So are they going to use the nuke? That would be my question. Because if they become totally emasculated, they still have that, ace in the hole, as John F. Kennedy said. So basically, are they going to use it? And that would be my concern. So one has to play these cards kind of differently to, let's say, Iran, who does not, or any other country which does not have the bomb. And so that, to me, is the hard part. If you totally paralyze the Russians, are they going to negotiate, or are they going to start the Third World War?
I think the latter option is not something that I don't think that's even a 50-50 proposition. I don't think that would happen. And I mean, I guess what it would mean is, what would it mean? No, mutual destruction?
Yeah.
I think also we don't have to be giving Ukraine a bunch of what would be classified as offensive weapons, but we shouldn't be cutting off the supply of defensive weapons, which is what Pete Hegseth did recently, apparently without even telling Donald Trump, if you believe him.
No.
I mean, they need anti-air defense in every form available. We have stockpiles. We do. We're not depleting American stockpiles by giving Ukraine defensive weapons to fight against Russia. I'm so tired of that talking point that we won't be able to defend ourselves if we give Ukraine some weapons. Most of them are outdated weapons for the American point of view anyway, or they're replaced by American arms manufacturers, which is good for the U.S. economy, that we build more to replace what we give to Ukraine. But it doesn't, sanctions, great. And if I agree, if Putin really felt like his power was threatened, I think we would have to worry about him potentially using a nuclear weapon. But I don't think we're anywhere close to that point. He still controls some of the Ukraine's territory. He's not fighting to hold on to power in Moscow. He's got an iron grip on his own people. The Ukrainian army is not marching on Moscow right now. What we need is to give Ukraine what they need to defend themselves against these bombing raids he's launching against Kiev and other major Ukrainian cities. And that's the part I'm worried about. Just at any moment, they might turn the faucet off and stop giving Ukraine those defensive weapons. I'm not saying to give them weapons to launch attacks on Moscow, but give them what they need to defend Kiev.
Well, Joe, you're 100% correct, and that's certainly what should be our policy, in my opinion. And I think that we also, as Bill said, we have to consider seriously ratcheting up the economic sanctions. I think there's a bill, in fact, in the Senate that's going to be debated in the very near future about increased sanctions against Russia. But it goes back to what we've said on numerous occasions. This unfortunate talk from President Trump about his relationship with Putin and how we could end the war, we see it for what it was, a fabrication or maybe a hallucination in his own mind. And I know that maybe we don't want to go there right now, but that spins off to the degree of influence President Trump has with Bibi. So, I think that we have to come to terms with these situations and react accordingly.
That Senate bill, Eddie, is being put in play by Graham, Lindsey Graham. He basically,
Right.
it's talking about 500% tariff on any product coming out of Russia.
But again, part of the problem is we can't control where India and China get their oil from.
It's true.
If
Unless,
they're going to buy from
unless
Russia,
we
they're
do
going
what
to buy
Michael
from Russia.
said, that that would potentially be provocational to an escalation, an oil embargo by the United States Navy.
Yeah, I mean, Russia is basically getting all their money from their oil. So we would have to stop these tankers getting into these countries. So that would be the question. That would be the only way to paralyze them, because Russia is basically a large petrol station right now. So and India and China obviously are getting like 30% discount. So they like it as well because they are getting oil at 50% or so of the price. So they could start also getting involved. So that's where I think the rubber hits the road. How far do you go in order not to provoke a third world war? That's the question.
I have a solution. Solution. We get the Houthis, we get the people from Yemen, the pirates, to basically hijack their oil. We basically send them arms. And you know what? We'd be doing the Saudis a favor because they're pissing and moaning because of the decrease in the price.
Yeah, that's a very innovative solution.
Now, I'm being completely facetious when I said that, because I don't think either that the Houthis or this, the Somali pirates or the pirates from Yemen would basically do any business with us anyway. So, but that brings us back to the Iran-Contra.
The first thing, when I first came to America, I was told by my friend, everything comes down to dollars and cents. And I think that's been a prophetic statement. So as long as you pay them, they will do whatever you want.
Money talks, BS walks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's no laughing matter. It's sad state of affairs. It really is. And I'm not sure what the end.
The other thing I was going to say, that the Russians did leave Afghanistan when they were losing a lot of people. That was under Brezhnev. So they did leave so I was hoping that with all these losses, they will leave as well. But for whatever reason, and maybe it's exactly what you said, that Putin has such a iron grip and kills, we know he kills all of his opponents. So maybe people are living in fear and nobody's doing anything about it. But I'm sure the Russian population must be extremely angry about this war.
Oh, yeah, they have about 19% inflation right now.
Yeah.
So the sanctions have been
than Brezhnev was.
Whatever happened to those North Koreans that were there at the front line? So have they been wiped out?
As far as I know, they're still fighting there. I don't know what their casualty numbers have been like. But
I mean, I don't know if you can get an accurate estimate, but I've read as many as 3,000 to 4,000 have died. So can you imagine the alternative?
But you can. Look what Ukraine has done with what we have given them to defend themselves.
Yeah.
They need more.
Yeah, I mean, the raid into Russia with those drones, that was done by Ukraine without us, with weapons which are only like, I think a drone like that is like $2,000, which is nothing. And they were able to destroy, planes worth hundreds of millions.
Well, let's be honest. They knew they couldn't tell us about that.
Yeah.
And that's a sad state of affairs itself.
Yeah.
Which, calls BS on Trump for his disappointment or his faux disappointment with Putin.
But Vladimir, stop! Exclamation.
The only thing he failed to say is please.
Don't do it, Vladimir. Stop.
It's funny, isn't it ironic that Russia did nothing to lift a finger with Iran, their so-called ally, when most of the drones that the Russians were using in Ukraine came from Iran.
Right. And nor did they help Syria, because they are so exhausted with Ukraine, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
You know?
I guess it's going to be who wins the war of attrition.
Yeah.
You know, I think, but Ukraine probably will look like rubble when this is over. But then again, we could have a Marshall Plan to help rebuild it.
Yeah. Since we have such a huge debt, who cares about printing a few more dollars, right?
A billion here. Well, a
Just
billion
like
here, a
Michael
billion
said.
there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money, as Senator Everett Dirksen
Yeah,
said.
money talks. There's money in war. You know.
Yeah. Yeah,
What
you're
got
already
us-
adding 4 trillion more to the deficit, to the debt.
What got us out of the Depression? World War II for the most part. And
So this is the moment you're calling for World War III, right?
No. I'm just saying that looking back, I mean, not that Trump studies history. I don't think he's read a paragraph since he's even been president.
Well,
But,
come on. He was able to identify that President Polk is called by people President Polk. We have somebody here. He's called President Polk. He was kind of a real estate guy. That was how he described James K. Polk. I guess because he took a lot of land from Mexico, that makes him a real estate guy.
Well, Trump has renamed the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America, and his daughter-in-law was wearing one of those hats, the Gulf of America. I guess they're hawking them now. You know,
where's his daughter been?
She was at the Bezos wedding, the $55 million Bezos.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. Because there's money to be made. She and Jared smelled it. They were in Venice.
Good for them.
I don't know if the Venetians were happy with that.
Hey. That's really interesting because I was, on another note, when, a lot of cities, particularly Venice and also Barcelona in Spain, are enacting legislation, or the populace there is trying to enact legislation that there should be only limited amount of tourists, because these cities are being overtaken by tourists and there are not enough apartments for regular people. So it is interesting that on one hand the tourists bring money, but they also kind of displace the local population.
Are they tourists, Michael, or expats?
Probably both. I was in Spain just now when I went to visit my mother, and I met a lady who was a lawyer, and she deals with immigration law, and she was saying that a lot of gay people from US are now going to Spain because they are concerned about the potential, the LGBT type of community is going to be not treated well in the United States. So she was saying that she had many gay men coming to Spain and trying to get permanent residence there.
Oh, but we'll get all those undesirables out of here, right?
But I think it's kind of over-exaggerated. I mean, Scott Bessent is gay, and I don't think it's kind of as bad, but they are afraid, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, he's got immunity.
He's the court gay person.
Yeah. It's like what's Donald Trump's my African American over there. It's like my gay person over there.
Right. Some of my best friends are Jewish.
Or at his campaign rallies. Where are my blacks? Where are my blacks?
Well, he used the term Shylock the other day in a speech. Do we think that's because he's a big fan of Shakespeare and The Merchant of Venice?
I don't even think he knows what he was talking about. I mean, his father started suffering from Alzheimer's in his late 70s, and it just got progressively worse. I wouldn't be surprised if he's got the onset already, especially too the impulse control when it goes. That one press conference where he dropped the F-bomb. I mean, I wonder about that. Instead of talking about Biden and researching Biden, I mean, look at what we have as president now. I mean, seems to be a repeat performance, only their personalities are different. One is an antisocial misfit, and the other one seemed to be a decent man. And the grift of Hunter Biden, if there was grift, which was never proved, pales in comparison to what the Trump crime family is doing with crypto and everything else. So but you know what? That's what happens when you elect a would-be king.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I mean, no question that anybody over 70 has some cognitive loss. I mean, everything degenerates as you get older. Your skin becomes more wrinkled, you lose your hair, and and the brain shrinks. I mean, that's been scientifically proven. So everybody, to a various degree, is going to have some cognitive decline. The problem with Trump, and I'm only going by what we all know, I certainly am not his personal physician, is that he always has said, was very impulsive and said things without really thinking about it, even as a young man. So the question is he just kind of, obviously is worsening with everybody, but that's just part of his personality, or is he like seriously getting significant cognitive loss? And the only way you could say that would be if he was evaluated by a by a neutral party, like have a Harvard-trained neurologist who would examine him. But that's not going to happen.
No, they were all fired.
Right. But that wouldn't come. But the same happened with Biden. I mean, talking about Biden, there was a conspiracy between the Democrats to totally deny what was the truth. I mean, that goes totally against. Now, I understand some people will say it's better to have a corpse in the White House than Donald Trump. But the truth was that they all conspired and were claiming that he was perfectly fine and that you had to be really sharp to go to meetings with him, and he would always focus on the minute point. And if you didn't have the answers, you would feel embarrassed, But the reality was that they all knew he had cognitive decline, and they hid it. So
and yet, I mean, I agree with you, and that was obviously an awful thing the Democrats did, especially how long they kept it up, which kind of doomed them in the election ultimately. But I mean, Joe Biden probably could have passed one of these dementia tests that Donald Trump brags about acing all the time. He could identify an elephant and say what time it is on a clock. I mean, that's the test. I know my wife's grandfather took multiple times that Donald Trump brags about all the time, how he's aced, that's supposed to show that he's a super genius. No, that shows you can identify an elephant and say what time a clock says.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because I just went through that.
Did you?
I had a physical, and the physician's assistant was the one that did the intake. And she said, I'm going to give you 3 words. I want you to remember them. And the next thing she asked me was, here's a clock, put 11:15 on the clock, draw it, And it's sad because I sat there trying to say repeat in my mind that the 11:15 I could handle. The 3 things that she asked me to remember, she was going to ask me at the end of, the little conference we had before I saw the doctor, And
it wasn't person, man, camera, TV?
No, it wasn't. But fortunately, I was able. I guess I have some slide, but not enough to fail that test.
Although, you know what? My students, the vast majority of them, high schoolers, don't know how a clock works. So they wouldn't be able to do that part.
They couldn't do it.
No.
They couldn't do it.
No,
but I just want to say something. I don't think Trump is anywhere near the condition that Joe Biden was in. I don't believe that Trump is senile. I don't believe that he's getting senile. I think he's an impulsive guy, and as Michael said, he's been impulsive all his life. And is he as sharp as he was 10 years ago? No. But he's not senile. He knows exactly what he's doing, and unfortunately, it's not in many cases what we would do.
Yeah,
but
during the whole round with Biden, during those debates, he accused Biden of being on Ritalin. And it came out of the blue at a press conference. Would they pump him up on Ritalin? I had my I wouldn't doubt that both of them were, at the time, to help them to focus during the course of the debate. One of the side effects of Ritalin with adults is, dries out your sinuses. And if you remember the debates with Biden, there were a number of times where he was like sniffling, sounding like he had sinus issues. But I think it's probably done more or less a lot, because if you look at the Senate and the Congress, there are a lot of guys in their 70s and 80s.
Yeah. I mean, the sad part is, being a physician, I still work very part-time in the hospital, and over 70, all of us have to go through the cognitive test, and not that little one where they give you 3 names and whatever. You have to do what's called MOCA, Montreal Cognitive Assessment, which is a test which is pretty, difficult, and certain questions are hard to answer. But everybody over 70 has to go through it, and that's correct, because doctors should have their cognition relatively intact. But the politicians don't have to do it, and we have to do it with an independent evaluator. You cannot go to your primary physician whom you know and ask him to do it. You have to go to a place that they send you. So that should be done also with politicians over 70. So,
not a doctor who says that Donald Trump is 231 pounds.
So, I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, you go to see your general practitioner, and they have to go through the cognitive test, and the president of the United States doesn't.
No, but Joe, it's funny because just a few days ago, I saw a profile shot of Trump in a golf shirt, and I'm telling you what, it looked like he was ready to go into the WWE ring, and it was.
He's going to be the headliner when they do it at the White House.
At the White House.
The UFC fight at the White House?
At the White House. Now, there's a perfect example of, Bill has said it before about, holding up the shiny object and distraction. There's a beautiful example of Trump coming up with something which will never come to pass. All right. But
McMahon's wanted to pass.
It's not going to happen. We know. Look, that's not going to happen. There might be a UFC event on July 4th in Washington D.C., but it's not going to be at the White House.
Well, hopefully not.
Well, I hope not. I really do. I hope not.
Just brand new news. A federal judge just issued a new injunction against Trump's order to block nationwide citizenship in response to a class action suit that was brought, which the Supreme Court's ruling last week allowed a class action suit to cover a nationwide injunction as opposed to an individual suit, which we talked about a little bit last week. So that just happened about 10 minutes ago.
Okay. Well, that'll take its course. And
how long will that take, Ed, before it gets to the Supreme Court?
It's tough to say whether the courts will hear it on an expedited basis or not. But assuming it'll go to the Court of Appeals. Yeah. And then the Supreme Court may or may not take the case. It's so there's to answer your Bill, there's really no telling. There really is no telling.
Although we talked about that the last one took a little bit of an interesting course.
Yes.
Supreme Court, where they wound up ruling only on the technical aspect, not on the procedural aspect, not even on the meat of the case.
Right.
So that just did happen. It was a Republican, George Bush appointed judge who issued this injunction. But I mean, we've talked about birthright citizenship before. Is there any chance the Supreme Court says that birthright citizenship, if they do take up the case in the long run, isn't established by the 14th Amendment?
Well, I don't think there's. You can't say there's no chance. That's the honest answer. But based on the Constitution and on the subsequent case from the late 19th century, I would say that birthright citizenship is clearly established both by the Constitution and by precedent. So, but I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. Thomas seems like he'll vote whatever Donald Trump wants on any issue. Alito seems down that rabbit hole too, but I can't imagine four of the other judges ruling that way. But we'll talk about that another issue, another time.
Yeah,
It just
that's
flashed
for
up on
another
my
day.
screen, so I figured I'd bring it up because we've talked about that before. But we're beyond the hour point here. I don't want to keep anybody, and actually I have to pick up my son from summer camp. But let's go around and get everybody's last little reflections and thoughts on this episode, and hopefully we'll record another one next week. I mean, I have this kind of more regular schedule now, where I have these couple hours when my son is at summer camp. So hopefully we'll be able to dig deeper into some of these issues over these next couple weeks on a more regular schedule. But let's go. Judge, you went last to begin, so you can go first to close out here.
I know I'm repeating the obvious, but I'm very concerned about this situation in the Ukraine. And I can only hope, as you said, Joe, and we've all said, I hope we have decided to provide the Ukrainians with the defensive weapons that they need. And I hope we stick to it. And we're going to have to hope for the best. But the civilian casualties are most tragic. And on the other side of it, I have to say, I also have wondered, as Michael has, about this tremendous number of Russian casualties and the lack of outrage by the Russian populace. But so that's the way I'll end it.
Bill?
Well, I'll end it on Taylor. I'll get on Mike Eddie's comment there. It's historic the way the Russians basically would use infantry through the Tsars, through Stalin during World War II. They approach a minefield. Tanks, artillery do not go through. Men go through. Men were always expendable. So that hasn't changed from Romanov to Stalin to Putin, and it's a shame. That's so much cannon fodder and unnecessary death for what? So I'll just leave it at that.
Doctor?
Well, since we are talking about wars, there is a great quote which is attributed to Trotsky, and it says, "You may not be looking for a war, but war is looking for you." So Trump has tried seemingly to end those wars. In fact, being a narcissist, he thought he would end the war in 24 hours or even before he becomes a president, which of course did not happen. But unfortunately, it's just the part of human nature that humans have two sides to themselves. One is the very generous, compassionate, charitable side, and then we have this violent, self-preservative Darwinian side, and that's been throughout the history, and that's kind of the tragedy of it all. So, I feel it's very unlikely, we will ever have time and there will be no wars and people will keep killing each other. And the question is it going to end up in some kind of a global catastrophe? Because right now we do have nuclear weapons and there is a potential for the mutual destruction of everybody. But the positive part of it is that certain type of insect, like cockroaches and certain type of bacteria, will survive. So then we will have a new evolutionary cycle after that. So on a universal scale, who knows, maybe the next species who will develop will be better than us.
Does whatever Stephen Miller is survive that kind of thing?
He's already on that level.
Reptilian.
Did you notice those antennae that pop up?
My final thoughts, obviously, as I said, I want us to continue to arm the Ukraine in their war to defend themselves. Every country has a right to defend its territorial integrity. I'm glad, I guess, Donald Trump is finally starting to maybe see that Vladimir Putin is not Mr. Wonderful. Beyond that, the big, beautiful bill, we didn't talk much about it really, but I'm not shocked that every one of the Republicans basically caved and voted for it, as was.
No, one didn't, right?
Yeah, Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. But even that, I have doubts that he would have if he wasn't assured that it was going to pass, even if he did vote no. So it gave him a little bit of cover to vote no on it. I'm very, very cynical of my former party at this point in Congress. But beyond that, I'll keep looking for the Epstein list.
Let's hope your name is on
Must be here somewhere.
I'm concerned about Pam Bondi's organizational skills. It was on her desk. And
You got to clean that desk up.
Yeah, whatever. But, listeners, as always, reach out to us. Oh, and on the big, beautiful bill, I'm also very upset. We never talked about this part. It did cut significantly the funding for the National Park Service, which is something I talked about months ago about Trump's plans for the budget. But that is an issue that matters to me, and we never really talked about it. But it did cut by over 30% the budget for the National Park Service, which I think is one of the best things America has, is our National Park Service. But listeners, let us know what you think about what's been going on recently. We can be reached, as always, at Wigs for Wigs, the name of this show. That is WIGSFORWHIGS at gmail.com. We love hearing from you, and we hope you'll join us again soon for another episode of Wigs for Wigs. Take care, everybody. The views expressed in Wigs for Wigs are purely those of the individual speakers and are not meant in any way to represent the views of any places of employment.